Fear has a strange way of working. It whispers, fills the silence, and becomes a constant companion. And the worst part? It craves control. It seeps into small decisions and quickly spreads to the big ones. Before we even realize it, we're trapped, not by visible chains, but by assumptions and what-ifs. What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? What if God isn't really with me on this path? The unknown scares us because it demands that we let go of control. It asks us to trust when we long for guarantees. We want detailed maps, precise answers, and clear signs. But God rarely works that way. Think about it. How many times have you hesitated simply because you didn't know what would happen next? How many opportunities have you let pass because fear whispered it was safer to stay put? But what if faith isn't about being sure of the destination, but about having the courage to move forward, even when you can't see the whole road? Maybe trusting God in the unknown doesn't mean getting rid of fear, but learning to walk with it, knowing you're never alone on the journey. You know, I've heard so many people say they wish they had more faith, but in reality, what they truly want is more control. Because trusting God in the unknown is no easy request. It's not like flipping a switch and suddenly everything is resolved. It's more like walking through the fog, taking one step at a time without seeing too far ahead. And that's scary, because we want certainty. We want guarantees before we move forward. We want God to show us exactly where each step will lead before we dare to leave where we are. But what if faith doesn't work like that? I remember a friend who went through something like this. He had a good job, safe, stable. But deep down, he felt God was calling him to something different, something that required courage. And the more he prayed for clarity, the more it seemed like God remained silent. "Why won't he give me a straight answer?" he told me one day, frustrated. "I just want to know if I'm doing the right thing." I understood exactly what he meant. How many times have we felt the same? We wait for an obvious sign, a path with no risks, an absolute certainty that everything will work out. But God rarely works that way. The Bible is full of stories about people who faced the unknown without having all the answers. Think of Abraham. God told him, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household and go to the land I will show you." Genesis 12:1. That was it. No map, no guarantees, just an invitation to trust. Can you imagine what went through Abraham's mind? He had a well-established life, a home, and suddenly God says, "Just go." No details, no concrete plan, just a promise, and still, he went. It makes me wonder, how often do we hold back because we're waiting for God to reveal the entire road ahead? But what if he's actually waiting for us to take the first step before showing us the next? Maybe that's what scares us most. The fear of the unknown makes us doubt. What if I take this step and everything goes wrong? That voice shows up in moments of decision, when we're standing before something big, when we know we need to move forward, but insecurity keeps us frozen. That's what happened to Peter. In the middle of the storm, Jesus appeared walking on water. Peter, impulsive as always, asked to go to him. Jesus simply said, "Come." And Peter went. At first, it was all going fine. But then he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the storm, on the waves, on the wind. And he began to sink. Isn't that what happens to us too? We take the first step in faith, but when difficulties arise, we start to doubt. Fear takes over, and we feel like we're sinking. I know what that feels like. There was a time when I had to make a difficult decision. One of those crossroads moments when there are no signs pointing to the right direction. I prayed, asked for guidance, but it felt like God was silent. Fear started to creep in. What if I'm making the wrong choice? What if I fail? What if I'm alone in this? But after a lot of wrestling, I realized something. My insecurity wasn't really about God. It was about me, because trusting in the unknown was never about having absolute certainty. It was about choosing to move forward even without it. Think about it. If we had all the answers, would we still need faith? Fear will always whisper the worst-case scenarios. It will always show us what could go wrong. But faith reminds us that God is already ahead, preparing the way. Maybe you're standing at that point right now, frozen between fear and faith, trying to decide whether to take the next step or wait for a clearer answer. If that's the case, let me ask you, hasn't God already given you enough signs? Hasn't He already placed in your heart what needs to be done? But you're waiting for a level of certainty that may never come? And what if trusting God in the unknown simply means going forward, knowing He will never leave you alone? The fear of the unknown makes us want to cling tightly to what we already know, but faith invites us to open our hands. And that's the real challenge, isn't it? To trust without seeing, to move forward without having all the answers. But what if, instead of waiting for absolute certainty, we started asking ourselves, what if it works out? Our instinct is always to imagine the worst. What if I fail? What if everything falls apart? But what if this time we change the question? What if this step into the unknown is exactly what will lead us to the purpose God has for us? What if, down the road, we look back and realize that this moment of uncertainty was actually a turning point? I know it can be scary. I know it's hard to let go of control. Trusting doesn't happen automatically. It's not just deciding once and never feeling fear again. In truth, trusting God is a process. It's a daily learning experience. Peter walked on water because his focus was on Jesus. But the moment he looked at the wind, he began to sink. What changed? The wind had always been there. The only difference was where his eyes were fixed. So, maybe the question we need to ask today isn't, what if I sink? But rather, where am I looking? If all we see are the risks and uncertainties, fear will grow. But if we choose to fix our eyes on God, we realize He has always been there, ready to hold us. So here's an invitation. Think about what's been paralyzing you. What's the step you know you need to take, but you're still hesitating? Now, take a deep breath and surrender that to God. You don't need all the answers right now. Just trust that He's guiding you. Maybe there won't be an immediate sign. Maybe the path still feels foggy, but when you look back, you'll see that faith took you exactly where you needed to be. And maybe, just maybe, this moment that feels uncertain today is exactly what God is using to make you stronger. The fear of the unknown can be a heavy burden to carry. It makes us hesitate, convinces us that it's safer to stay where we are, that it's better to hold on to what we already know. But living like that isn't really living, is it? Faith invites us to take steps, even when the road ahead isn't fully visible. And yes, that can feel scary. But what if deep down, that uncertainty is part of the plan? Many of the most powerful stories in the Bible don't begin with clarity, but with obedience. Abraham didn't know where he was going, but he went. Moses didn't feel prepared, but he obeyed. Peter didn't know if he could walk on water, but he stepped out of the boat. None of them had all the answers when they chose to trust God. But they all had one thing in common. God was already there, waiting for them in the unknown. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're waiting to feel brave enough to take a step of faith. But what if the courage comes after the first step? What if God is simply waiting for you to trust Him enough to begin? John Ortberg once wrote something that has always stayed with me. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. That line holds a powerful truth. We can't experience God's supernatural work while we're clinging to the comfort of the familiar. So here's the question. What's holding you back? The fear of uncertainty? Worry about what might go wrong? The idea that you need more answers before you can act? But what if, instead of seeking guarantees, you simply chose to trust that God is already ahead, preparing the way? I know it's not easy. I know that sometimes all we want is a clear sign, absolute confirmation. But faith doesn't work like that. Faith calls us to walk first, to trust before we see. And the truth is, God is already where you're afraid to go. He doesn't just see your future, He's already in it. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. Psalm 56:3. So today, just breathe. Let go of the weight of doubt, and trust that even in the unknown, you will never walk alone.